In the aftermath of several mass attacks in China, including car ramming incidents and knife assaults, the country is grappling with not only the immediate fallout from such violent events, but also the long-term psychological effects on the victims, their families, and society as a whole. The recent surge in violent incidents has sparked widespread concern, particularly after a deadly attack on November 19, when an SUV driver deliberately rammed into pedestrians and students outside a primary school in southern China.
And I think it raised a lot of concern, and people are worried about their personal safety when they're in the. So I think this is something that we need to pay extra attention to. And Rome wasn't built in a day. So with this kind of like sudden incident, it definitely not having one contributing factors. So given that people are still adjusting themselves after the pandemic, dealing with financial pressures and social changes, and also all the post-traumatic effects coming out from the pandemic, and I think they're still finding it very challenging to deal with it and to manage it. So I think it's very important to understand that how much they can better manage themselves emotionally and also mentally. And of course, they need a lot of support.
This follows a horrific incident on November 12, in which a driver drove a vehicle into a crowd at a sports center in Zhuhai, resulting in the deaths of 35 people and injuries to 43 others. Psychotherapist Sammy Wong, reflecting on the ongoing crisis, highlighted the complexities of mental health challenges faced by those affected by such traumatic events. According to Wong, the psychological aftermath of violent incidents is often underestimated. The victims and their families are not only left to cope with physical injuries, but also with emotional and psychological scars that can have long-lasting effects. These include symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and depression, which can manifest long after the initial trauma. Wong also pointed to the social stigma surrounding mental health in China, noting that despite the availability of mental health resources, many individuals are hesitant to seek help due to societal attitudes that label mental illness as a sign of weakness or failure. This reluctance to access support further compounds the psychological burden borne by the victims and their communities.
I think after the pandemic, different governments, they're already becoming very aware of all the mental challenges that arise from the pandemic, especially with the trauma they experience. So I believe that the system has been supportive enough and continue to be very supportive. But what's really lacking right now is really this education of how important emotional well-being is to us. And I believe that a lot of people still kind of having this social stigma of seeking therapeutic help. So even though the resources are there, they're very reluctant to use it. So I believe that psychoeducation is really the fundamental step that we need to consider before providing more service that nobody will actually come and use.
Wong stressed the importance of psychoeducation, particularly in a society where mental health issues are often brushed aside or misunderstood. He emphasized that addressing the stigma surrounding mental health is essential not only for those directly impacted by violent incidents, but also for creating a broader culture of care and understanding. Educating the public about the signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, and promoting the idea that seeking help is a sign of strength, could encourage more people to reach out for support before their psychological struggles worsen. In addition to the psychological toll, the recent spate of attacks has also raised concerns about security measures and the broader social issues that may be contributing to these violent outbursts.
So yes, being open-minded to this kind of service and support is really the positive sign of our younger generation. But I believe that it's very important to bridge the gap between the younger generation and the older generation. So the younger generation will be able to support the older generation to become more receptive towards mental health support and that service that are available to them already.
While much focus has been placed on the immediate responses to the attacks, including increased security and calls for stricter regulations on vehicles and weapons, the ultimate question remains: what drives individuals to commit such violent acts? And how can China address the root causes of this rising violence?
I believe that people really need to talk about the impact, that this kind of event that have on them in their daily life, even though they're just watching the news, they're just reading the newspaper, reading the updates about this event, it doesn't mean that they are not being affected. So talk about it with their friends and family, and also professional service is very, very important. The second thing is that really start to work on what we can do in order to promote the psychology to people in daily life. So they can start from parents, from kindergartens, from teachers. Basically, everyone is responsible for this kind of event. No one can escape the obligations for this kind of promotion.
There is a growing recognition that, beyond individual psychological factors, social and economic pressures may be contributing to the uptick in mass attacks. Economic hardship, social isolation, and feelings of disenfranchisement are often cited as factors that could lead individuals to lash out in violent ways. However, addressing these issues requires a long-term commitment to both mental health and social policy reforms. As China grapples with the challenges posed by these violent incidents, experts like Wang are urging the government and society to take a holistic approach to both prevention and recovery. This means not only improving access to mental health services, but also fostering an environment where people feel empowered to seek help without fear of judgment. Only by confronting these issues head-on can China hope to address the psychological and social challenges posed by such traumatic events, and ultimately, reduce the likelihood of future mass attacks. In 2023, China recorded approximately 4.5 million criminal incidents, marking a slight increase of around 73,000 cases compared to the previous year, when 4.42 million crimes were reported. This uptick, while modest, reflects ongoing trends in crime data over recent years. To understand these figures in context, it's important to explore both the historical trajectory of crime in China and the specific types of crimes that are most prevalent, as well as to compare China's crime rates with those of other countries. Crime in China has experienced significant fluctuations over the past few decades. In 1999, the total number of criminal incidents was recorded at about 2.2 million. However, this figure steadily increased through the 2000s, peaking at nearly 7.2 million incidents in 2015. Since then, crime rates have started to decline, likely due to advancements in law enforcement technologies, including the widespread use of surveillance systems and other security measures. These improvements, which have made it easier to detect and prevent criminal activity, have contributed to a reduction in overall crime in China, especially in urban areas where surveillance is more prevalent. Despite the decrease in recent years, it is important to note that China's crime figures remain relatively modest in comparison to those of other countries. With a population of approximately 1.4 billion people, the number of reported crimes per capita is lower than in many other nations. For example, in 2022, the United States recorded more criminal incidents than China, despite its population being less than a fifth of China's. Similarly, neighboring Singapore, a highly urbanized city-state with advanced surveillance and law enforcement capabilities, reports a crime rate that is significantly higher than China's.